Welcome back to part 2 of the extension to my table saw. While I was waiting for parts, I actually did do a few things in order to continue on the build, but today we're going to run through the last of those things that I did. A few things I didn't do on camera, unfortunately, in order to make this store a lot better for me. And then we're going to finish up with what I plan to do to get it mounted to the ceiling, get the legs on it, and adjust it to size. So I'm going to get to that right now. First thing I'm going to do is grab the legs and start attaching the adjustable the adjustable feet I picked up from Amazon. Just 4 of them on the bottoms, and then we'll see where it lines up with the table saw so I can adjust it to size. Here we go. So the top is a little heavier than I wanted it to be. It was one of the things I was afraid of, but at this point in time, that's where I'm at. I've got the top all set up, so the legs will fit in. I may have to throw in another small pocket hole just to sort of reinforce them. But right now I'm going to flip the top on, put it on the legs, and then start framing in the bottom. I might raise that up just a little to give me a little clearance in case I decide to hang anything from the bottom or anything else I might want to do. Or for storage for the legs themselves, I may actually put them in this bottom frame rather than below the top because the top's already so heavy. So here it goes. So I guess that pretty much works. A little easier putting on than what I thought it was going to be. So for now, I'll make do. So I'm going to frame in the bottom ones, probably raise it up by about 3.5 inches, something like a 2x4 or a 1x3, something just to raise that up. Then I have some pins that I actually had from another project. These 5/8" pins that I will probably drill a hole through the bottom framing system so I can put one of these in there, and that will hold them in place exactly where I want them and make everything a little more stable. So this is roughly where it sits. I've thrown in those 5/8" pegs down on the bottom and created the frame about 3/4 of an inch off the floor. Right now it stands probably, I don't know, 1/2 inch or so too tall, but I'm going to add about a 1/2 inch more worth of the adjustable feet, so I will shave off the legs at that time. One thing I didn't necessarily account for is the stand legs. I may run into an issue once the feet are put on the legs that these are in the way, so I may have to actually notch it out a little. One of the good aspects that came out of it is I will probably find a way to incorporate these stand legs into exactly where I want the table saw to sit. That way I can sort of frame in where these legs slide across this lower frame, so that I have one standard blade line and blade point all the way across, so I can do measurements. So not necessarily something I accounted for, but something I can probably work out. So not the end of the world. So with that said, I will come back when I have the legs from the little adjustable feet that I've got from Amazon. But other than that, it's ready to go. I'll come back and collapse it another time and finish this up. Alrighty. So the first thing I plan to do is grab these legs, mark the middle of the bottom of these, then grab my 3/4 inch Forstner bit and drill out just a little bit so it'll sit the nut of these feet. And then I need to drill a hole further in to hold the screw for the adjustability of the feet. So I'm going to work on that now. Before I get to putting it all back together, there's a few more pieces I want to add, and that is some support braces for the length of these boards, this table itself, because honestly with the pocket screws that we have into the back of the 3/4 inch top of the table and the weight of the table overall, I'm not sure that's going to be quite a great hold. So I'm going to grab a spare piece of plywood that I have here, cut a strip of it about 2 inches long. I'm going to attach that both with pocket screws from one side and straight through from the other side. And that's actually the straight edge I'm going to use to brace it and hang it from the ceiling behind me. Alrighty? So now we're going to assemble the whole table with the little feet, the adjustable feet attached to it, and see where it sets up next to the table saw. There are still a few things I have to do, such as chop the legs a little bit to adjust the height, now with the feet, and also probably put a couple of stop blocks in the base of the table so that the legs of the table saw stand can slide right in and I can have it in a consistent spot every time. So right now we're going to put it all back together and we'll see where it lays next to the table saw. So in order to make the table saw sit in a very specific spot every time, what I plan to do is grab my multi-tool and I'm going to notch out right where I want the legs of the table saw to sit, maybe even give it a little more room because I can lock it in with some stop blocks afterwards. But I'm going to grab the multi-tool, I'm going to notch out a little spot here so that these legs slide right in. So I want you guys to know, for most of my builds, it doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be pretty. So all I did was take the multi-tool very roughly and notch out some spots for those legs to sit. So now the table saw should be pretty close to in the same spot every time. Worst case scenario, when I get the table leveled and to the right height, I will put some stop blocks on the other side, so not only will they slide through those slots, but I also have very specific stop blocks on either side of the leg so that the table saw is always in the exact same spot. I did some measurements for the table itself. I'm roughly 1.5 inches too tall, so I'm going to dismantle it and chop 1.5 inches off. And in case you guys were wondering, I did mark all of my legs, so I put them back in the same spot every time. So I've got it all set up again. I chopped the top of the legs by about 1.5 inches
using the miter saw. Then I grabbed my sander and I just sanded off the corners again so that they slide into their spots nicely. I put the table saw back in place and I've screwed the legs up a little bit just to adjust the height. Now we're fairly level, fairly flush with the table saw. I don't want to be right on top of flush with the table saw because I don't want anything to catch just in case something's a little off or anything settles a little bit. But right now that's right about where we need to be. With that being said, I'm going to grab some 2x6s. I hope I have some around. And I'm going to mount them to the ceiling, to the floor joists of this basement, and use hooks from garage hanging up bikes and stuff like that. And I'll show you how I do that in a minute. So I'm going to grab some 2x6s, cut them to length, and then start screwing in the hooks. And then hopefully we can get this entire table lifted off the ground, out of the way, hanging from the ceiling. And I can show you a couple of the other things I did do in order to make this save space. So as you can see, it's now all hanging from the ceiling. A little more in the way than I wanted it to be, but with the way I ended up doing it, it works well that the top faces the back and fits up against the joist. And what I've done with the bottom here was one of the things I did off camera was I created a storage area for all 4 legs built into the bottom piece. That way I can store all the legs right inside the unit itself, all hanging. It is a little heavier than sin to get up there by myself, but it is nearly a full sheet of 3x4, 3/4 inch plywood, as well as all the framing that's on there, and the 4x4 legs are quite heavy altogether as well. So easier said than done, but given the small workspace and that the wife has not let me move some of my work area into the bigger part of the basement, and this is all I've got, with how rarely I'm probably going to have to be cutting plywood like that, this is probably the best thing for it. Stored, it's up, it's away. Worst case scenario, I take it off the ceiling and I lay it in the corner of another room and just bring it out when I need it. Either way, it's not a full standing table taking up a buttload of room. So that being said, again, I don't do any of my stuff perfect. I think of all these ideas. I may have some new ones coming for you based on some other people's designs and just show you how to do them. But it's not that hard if you just think it through. None of my cuts are perfect. None of these I really have significant plans for. So I think this is going to work out really good for me. I've got a project coming up with some big pieces of plywood. I actually have a entertainment center I'd like to build. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks I can pick up some materials for that and start showing you guys that project. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, this is for the most part the end, unless I have a couple little tweaks. But it looks like I can easily cut an 8-foot piece of plywood in half just by clamping on a straight edge to this nice big table extension. Thanks for watching.
Please subscribe by hitting the icon, the bottom left portion of the screen, and check out some of my other videos.